I stare at my toes, I stare at the wall, and 3 minutes have passed. And it goes on and on and on. And human beings are built, I think even genetically programmed to associate with other human beings, to have physical contact, to hear the voices, to speak, to engage with, to be angry with, to love, to be annoyed, whatever it might be. And that strict, total isolation was punishing beyond a degree that I'd ever imagined. So to keep myself occupied and to feel that I am a person, I would invent games. No pencil, no paper, no means of recording. And I tried to remember the states of the United States of America. I knew it was round about 48, 49, 50. I think when I was a young kid it was 48, and then a couple more came on board. And I would go through the A's, my pronunciation, Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona. And I think I got up to about 47. I had 10 fingers then, so at least I could count up to like the F's, record them. And I won't mention which were the states that I didn't remember. I might be going there. And then I would sing songs, just to hear my own voice. And I'd start with A always, because Charmaine, quite a good profile of the hit songs of October 1963, usually arriving 6 months later in South Africa. I remember having problems with X, so I treated a bit deep in the heart of Texas. And my favorite was Always. I'll be living here always, year after year, always, in this little cell that I know so well. I'll be living swell, always, always. And then I'd twirl around and I'd feel amused at the fact that this Irving Berlin song, taken over by Noel Coward in a comedy of upper middle class manners, was keeping a young revolutionary in good form in a prison in South Africa. I'll be staying in always, keeping up my chin always, not for but an hour, not for but a week, not for 90 days, but always. Comes the 90th day, and I scratch the days on the wall like good prisoners do, and I'm wondering what's going to happen. And one of the warders comes to me, says, "Get ready to go, you're being released." I'm very suspicious. They give me back my tie, they give me back this heavy woolen suit. It's now October, November, December, middle of our summer. They give me back my watch. The only way I could tell the time was listening to chimes. To this day, when I hear chimes or even church bells going, I feel creepy. I'm conditioned like Pavlov's dogs to associate these sounds with that sense of terrible depression and isolation. And the station commander speaks to me. He's got a big smile on his face. I say, "Am I really free?" He says, "You're really free." I'm suspicious. And I start walking out of the police station where I was being held. And in through the door comes one of my interrogators. And he's also got a big smile, and he puts out his hand and shakes my hand and says, "I'm placing you under arrest." That's the English common law tradition. You touch the person when, I don't know if it's the same here, you're supposed to touch the body of the person who's being arrested. He did that through the handshake. So I go back, they take away my tie, they take away my watch, and I go up the stairs back into the cell again. That was the 90-day law. And our top court of appeal at that stage upheld the process whereby you're locked up for 90 days. It appeared to be a limit, and within literally 3 minutes afterwards you can be detained again. And the court had no difficulty upholding the perpetual 90-day periods. After 168 days in total, I'm told you're being released. This time I believed them because it wasn't the end of a 90-day period. And I was filled with such joy that I'd survived that I ran from the center of Cape Town to the nearest beach, which was 10 miles away. And my colleagues had heard, and they all came in their dark suits from court, and they came down to the beach, and they saw me fling myself, clothes and all, into the water. 2 years later, I'm locked up again. And this time it's much tougher interrogation. And you don't get stronger each time it happens. You actually get, I would say you get weaker. And now there's a squad down from Johannesburg, headed by notorious Roy Swanepoel was his name. And he would bang the table for 10 minutes. Bang, 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 bang. Loud noise for 10 minutes. And then total silence for 50 minutes. I'm not timing it, but I get that sense. And they're working in relays. Noise and silence, noise and silence. And I'm just sitting, and feeling myself getting more and more tired. The fatigue becomes huge. And it's going through the afternoon, through the evening. They give me something to eat with a little smirk, and I realize afterwards there's something in that food to weaken your resistance. And by about 5 in the morning, I know that I'm breaking. And I'd had clients who'd withstood sleep deprivation for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. They gave them oxygen. And when they broke completely. There was no resistance left. They were just human wrecks. And so I decide I'm going to try and manage my breakdown. I don't tell them straight away. I'm sitting, staring at them. And a few hours later, I collapse onto the floor. And suddenly, I see all these shoes around. Black shoes, brown shoes, pairs of shoes, shuffling, they're talking. And I'm lying there, closing my eyes, feeling wonderful, just down on the ground. And the water pours on me. Arms are lifting me up. I feel the fingers of Royrus pushing my eyes open. Sit and I collapse again. It happens, 2 or 3 times. I sit for a while, and eventually I start the process of answering their questions, trying to control my answers as much as I can. And stating, while I'm doing that, I'm making the statement under duress, describing the whole process, and thinking afterwards, he was doing something funny with the pages, and I'm signing different pages, and then feeling even more defeated because he had just eliminated that first page with the complaint in it. And so there was nothing, no tangible evidence. Eventually I was saved from further interrogation by the fact that somebody else who'd been locked up had a brief moment with his wife, and it described to her what was happening, and she went to the High Court and got a restraining order. So much depended on the judges at that stage, but that protected me as well. And probably the second most important legal document I've written in my life was on a tiny piece of paper, 1 square inch, in tiny print. Now I had pencil and paper, describing what had happened to me to be used in evidence in that particular case. And when I'm released after 3 months, my colleagues think, what are you going to do now? Climb Table Mountain? I said, take me home. And I've never got over that. There's a sorrow and a sense of humiliation and indignity of being crushed by a kind of physical resource through manipulation of my body that I will live with until forever. Being blown up didn't have anything like the same impact on me, the attack on my body, as the attack on my will, my dignity, my mind. And my story was far from the worst in South Africa. There were electric shock torture, people made to stand on bricks, people physically beaten up. It was a kind of privilege that pursued me even into detention as a white person, as an advocate. So thousands and thousands of us, because we are called terrorists, this is what happened to us. And it wasn't simply lack of access to lawyers and so on. The minute you unpick the whole set of protections in criminal procedure, it opens the way for, in effect, the people who are deciding on guilt or innocence, punishment or non-punishment, are not the judges. Maybe 3 years on, they have something of a say. The real decisions are being made by the security officials. What made it particularly bitter for us was that, in fact, we were against terrorism. This was the era of isms. Communism, socialism, capitalism, Stalinism, Trotskyism, Maoism. Lots of isms were around then. And one of the isms was terrorism. And terrorism was a bad thing in the ANC. Don't call me that. Comrade, if your policy is followed, it will be an example of terrorism. That was an accusation. And terrorism was seen as a form of indiscriminate action by elite groups, not involving the general population, not having clear political goals, simply exposing a degree of anger and hate, targeting in a way that was intended to cause a maximum distress and damage, with very little political content and very little reconstructive or transformative content. I remember in exile, early part of my exile, there was a movement called the Black September that was hijacking aeroplanes and getting huge publicity. And some of the members of the ANC were saying, what's wrong with our leadership? Why don't we do this? Nobody is looking to our struggle. Everybody's talking about their struggle. And the leadership were very firm. We are against terrorism. And one of the reasons was Oliver Tambo, our leader in exile. He could be on the aeroplane because it's indiscriminate. It also would have been, from a strategic and tactical point of view, disastrous. It would have played into the hands of white supremacy in South Africa. You see what they like? And if they get the vote, if they take over, they will just swamp us. They'll destroy us. They have no respect for human life. But I believe the deep reason was much more profound than that, certainly for people like Oliver Tambo. It's not only what does it do to the people who are indiscriminately killed, what does it do to you? When you become an instrument of death, when you lose your humanity, when you stop respecting the very values that bring you together and unite you with others, and that give you a tremendous sense of personality and resourcefulness and meaning to your life, when that's gone, then you've destroyed the kernel of the struggle itself. And some years later, the whole issue cropped up. We had a conference in a little town called Kabwe in Zambia, surrounded by Zambian troops in case commandos from Pretoria came to wipe us out. About 250 elected delegates, almost all from exile. And amongst the issues on the agenda, there were two. A day was set aside just to discuss these issues. The one was permissible forms of struggle. And I recall a King Sabato Dalinyebo, a traditional leader from the Eastern Cape in South Africa, a very patriotic, decent person who had been effectively forced out of the country because he refused to become a stooge of Pretoria. And he gets the microphone. He enjoyed being called Comrade King. And he speaks in Xhosa, African language, and those of us who are culturally backward, we have to wait till the translation comes, and everybody laughs after he's spoken. And we're wondering, why is everybody laughing? And he told the following story. He said, 2 men are fighting with sticks. It's a bitter, savage fight, and each one is being urged on by his wife. And the wife of man A says, my husband, you are stronger than B. You can defeat him easily, but he is beating you. And the reason is that you have a stick in one hand, and your other hand you're using to hold up a blanket to cover your nakedness. Drop the damn blanket and smash him up with both hands. And that's when we heard it in translation, we laughed, because we could see what he was getting at. And it was picking up on some things that we were hearing in the corridors until the whites feel the pain in their bodies in the way that we feel our pain. They will never let go of white domination. Until they cry for their children, we will continue to have apartheid in South Africa. But the policy of the ANC was totally against those forms of indiscriminate racial attacks. And I would know, certainly as far as our Tambo and the leadership and the mainstream of the organization were concerned, the feeling was, we want a country. The whites are never broad-minded, open, embracing, generous enough to take the whole nation, to embrace the whole nation, to conceive of the country as belonging to everybody. We African people who've known so much hurt, so much pain, we know it is possible that black and white can live together, that we can have a common citizenship. And that's what people really want. We believed in that. It was a deep, deep belief. And the minute you embark upon attacks against people because they belong to a particular racial group, you're destroying all that. You can rebuild the factories and the mines and the schools that might be destroyed in the struggle. You can't rebuild and repair the hearts of people who are deeply traumatized, and the trauma goes from generation to generation. If I had wished I could have jumped up and raised my hand and said, Comrade King, the policy that you've just been enunciating violates the deep philosophical traditions of the organization, and terrorism doesn't involve mobilization of the people, it belongs to a few, and so on and so forth. That's not the African way. You respect him, he's a king. They heard him out, there was the laughter, and they just moved on, like saying, we've heard what you said, that's not our policy. You haven't come up with any reasons. A lovely story you've told, but no reasons for departing from our policy, and the traditional policy was reaffirmed. The other issue on the agenda was torture. I'd heard about this from Oliver Tambo. I was working as Director of Research in the Ministry of Justice in Mozambique, New Independent Mozambique. The phone rings one day, and hello, Comrade Albie, it's OR here, Oliver Tambo, and he asks how I'm getting on, my health, the political situation in Mozambique. Again, it's very African style. I'm wondering, why is he phoning me? What's going on? But I answer quietly. He says, some problems have emerged, and would it be possible for you to come to Lusaka fairly soon? If it helps, I can speak to President Samora Machel. If you can't make it, I fully understand. Now here's the President saying, if you can't make it, I fully understand. The ordinary officials would say, Comrade Albie, there's a conference in Adelaide or Santiago in 2 days' time. Be there and take a 30-page paper with you. the president of the organization says, if you can't make it, I fully understand. And of course you want to say, take me, take me. Any event, a week later, I'm in Lusaka, go to his office, and I was quite amused because there were a lot of flies buzzing around. He had a rolled up newspaper and he was talking, but not even aware that he's swatting flies. And I don't know why I felt a president shouldn't be swatting flies. I don't know who else should be doing it. It would be ludicrous to have somebody with a fly swatter outside. And he asked me after my health and the political situation in Mozambique and my work. What's it about? What's it about? Eventually he says, a problem has arisen. We've managed to capture a number of people sent by Pretoria to destroy the organization. This is in Angola. Angola was recently independent. The ANC had military training there for the Mkhonto we Sizwe, the spear of the nation, the armed wing of the ANC. It's a very important political center for the ANC. And Pretoria was infiltrating people into their ranks with a view to killing, poisoning, disinformation. It wasn't a question of political dissidents being dealt with. And he said, we don't have any regulations governing how they should be treated. The ANC had your ordinary program, your aims and objects, you pay a membership fee, you agree with them, you have annual general elections, branches are constituted. And I guess most political parties don't have provisions dealing with what do you do. I mean, maybe the Democratic Party would like to have, even for the Watergate people, you know, that was dealt with by the state. It's not a political organization that deals with that. And the states that were harboring the ANC said, this is your problem. We don't want to be involved. We don't want our criminal justice system to be implicated in what really are ANC issues and problems. We've got enough of our own. He said it must be very difficult to have regulations in a case like this. I said in a rather jaunty, lawyer-like way, well, it's not difficult. You've got international instruments that say no torture, inhuman or degrading punishment or treatment. He said we use torture. I was stunned. ANC, we use torture. And he said it with a bleak face. In any event, I got guidelines from him, and possibly the most important legal work I've done, beyond any opinions I've written, beyond even that little piece of paper I smuggled out of jail, was the code of conduct for the ANC. It was in effect a law of criminal law and procedure for a liberation movement living in exile, adapted to the conditions where you don't have courts, you don't have prisons, you don't have prosecution service, you don't have a bar. You have people who've left the country to fight for freedom, performing different functions. We had to imagine and invent and create a system of legality to prevent torture and to ensure that when people were captured, they were dealt with in an orderly way according to criteria. And there were other problems in the ANC. People would assault other members of the organization. There might be sexual violations. People would steal money. People would drive vehicles recklessly or when they're being drunk. So we needed to deal with all of these. And the structure that I established after consultation was branches have to deal with their own problems. You get the person coming to a meeting, might be a bit drunk, irritating, interrupting the chair, messing things up. You don't have penal type sanctions for that. The branch has got to deal with it politically. And you shouldn't mix that up with the person coming in to assassinate the leadership. You certainly shouldn't deal with contrary political views through any form of repression. And then you've got your crimes that are crimes anywhere in the world, the stabbings, the assaults, the stealing. So we established regional tribunals to deal with that, and a method of appointment. And somebody would present the evidence, and there would be somebody defending the person concerned. The penalties were, there wasn't much that we could do really, but usually to the equivalent of a community service. And finally, for the most serious offences, and all of these are defined, we had special tribunals with a particular system of appeal, presentation of the charges in terms of the different clauses in the provision, the right to make a defence, the need to prove guilt. I'm not sure if we use the phrase beyond a reasonable doubt, but something like that. And as I said, ultimately an appeal system, and ultimately the president having the final power to pardon if there was a sanction imposed. It made a huge difference. I wouldn't say it stamped out all the violations. And I mean, Margaret will know that before we had the code of conduct, awful things were done. It was really one human being beating up another human being in an intolerable way. Afterwards, I wouldn't say it came to an end, but it was very much reduced, and it involved a change of personnel, but also a change of attitude. The conference accepted that. That wasn't a problem. But the one issue we had to put to the vote was, should intensive methods of interrogation be permitted? And we said, we need a vote on this. Tambo could have himself, as the president, decreed we don't have it. That wasn't his way. He felt these deep moral questions have to come from the membership. They have to internalize the issues. They have to debate and consider them. It shouldn't be a diktat, which they then memorize. It's far less effective if it's something memorized because you don't want to make a mistake than if it's something that you believe in and you take into yourself and you've discussed and agreed upon. And it was such a moving moment for me when it was mainly young soldiers came up onto the platform. And I remember the one guy saying, no torture should be allowed at all, whatever you call it. You just give the slightest little scope to the security people, and they won't stop there. It never stops there. They can never have enough power. Absolutely adamant. Another guy, also a young soldier, saying, and these are people in the front line. Probably both of them are dead now because of the way the struggle evolved. Their chances of survival were pretty slim. And he said, we are fighting for life. How can we be disrespectful of life? I felt such a sense of joy. It was easy for me. I'm a lawyer. I come from the same kind of background, rule of law, principles, right, justice, and so on. Maybe a sort of an elite in society, not facing the dangers that ordinary people in our country were facing. And this statement was coming so clearly, so firmly, such a strong, principled approach from the people literally in the front line. And unanimously we decided no intensive methods of interrogation permitted, no euphemism for torture, no possibility of it. In effect, we created a Bill of Rights for the organization long before we were back in our country negotiating a new constitution. And people speak about the miracle of South Africa, and it's all attributed to Nelson Mandela. He played a tremendous role. He was important. He didn't invent the themes that are associated with him. He articulated them more beautifully, more elegantly than possibly anybody else. That was tremendous. But these were themes of a movement. He was sitting in prison at the time. He wasn't a party to these decisions. If there was a principal person, it would have been Oliver Tambo, who happened to be his legal partner. It's Mandela and Tambo, the first black firm of attorneys in Johannesburg. So it was taking these principled positions and grappling with the issues involved before we came back that prepared the ANC for the Bill of Rights ultimately. We didn't go in for a Bill of Rights because we wanted to look nice and get approval from the rest of the world. It's what we believed in. It was what was constitutive of us, what we were fighting for, what held us together. It was a principal source of connection, human and political connection around these values and these ideals. So the ANC, in negotiations against capital punishment, no detention without trial, very strong on the rights of personal freedom to people, not to be abused, not to be tortured, freedom from physical violence in the public or private sphere, extensively represented, because this was our philosophy, and I might say strongly supported by the strength of the women's section of the ANC, looking to personal bodily integrity as an essential core of the freedom for which we were fighting. I personally was never in the armed struggle. I'm as close to being a pacifist as you can get without being a pacifist. I think the ANC was entitled to, obliged to include violence as one of its instruments of struggle, provided it didn't become the primary thing, the objective in itself, but something that would inspire people and give a place for a disciplined response to the violence of the state in a meaningful way. But the armed struggle came to me, and as you heard, as I was getting into my car to go to the beach on Women's Day in 1988 in Mozambique, the car exploded. And I mention that because when people discuss terrorism, it's always seen as these irregular groups out there. More people have been killed and maimed by state terrorism, far more than by terrorism from irregular groups, in spite of these spectacular and awful events that we know about. You think of the Argentine, the thousands have disappeared, of Chile. You think of the massacres in Guatemala, just to speak of the neighboring continent here. And in any discussion on terrorism, one has to look at the total picture. And in some ways, state terrorism has a particularly cruel dimension because the state has weapons and access and also an ability to control information in a way that the irregulars don't have. It doesn't in the slightest condone terrorism as a political form by people struggling sometimes for the noblest of ideals. And I think our experience establishes that. But nevertheless, it is part of the total equation. Well, that's Albie Sachs' experience prior to 1990s. We fast forward. It's Sachs J, as we call ourselves, Justice Albie Sachs, wearing a green gown, a member of the 11-person court, Constitutional Court of South Africa. And we're hearing the case of Mr. Mohammed. It turned out that he had been responsible for moving materials used for the blowing up of the American embassy in Dar es Salaam. Forget the exact year. The name Al-Qaeda wasn't known then, but looking back now, it was clearly an Al-Qaeda group, around about 2000. And the embassy exploded, the building exploded, and something like 40 Tanzanians and 20 Americans were killed. It was a terrible act. Just the kind of thing that we in the ANC detested and wanted to avoid. And it wasn't only aimed at the civilians there, it was aimed at international law. It was attacking a building associated with international law, violating that relative degree of immunity that, for very good reasons, diplomatic instances enjoy. It appears that he came down, he was 21 years old, he came to Cape Town under an assumed name, he got political asylum, and he was working as a pastry chef. And he was apparently very quiet and a very good pastry chef. And one day, he didn't turn up to work, and his employer was a bit worried and wondering and made inquiries and learned that he'd been arrested and he was about to be sent to the United States in an FBI aeroplane to stand trial for mass murder. The employer said, I don't know. All I know is this guy was very quiet. He worked very well. I've got a lawyer who will try and find out what's happening. The lawyer approached the authorities. They said, no, he's on his way out. He's an illegal immigrant. End of the matter. The employer applies to the Cape Town High Court, and the judge says, there's nothing we can do. He's an illegal immigrant. He was here under a false name. He's been deported. It's now a problem for the American justice system. There's an appeal to our court. It's too late to get him back. He's there. But there are issues of principle and importance for the future involved. We don't discuss our cases before the hearing in the Constitutional Court. We don't want to influence each other. We want to come with as open a mind as possible. From the questions, it was very clear early on, all of us were extremely unhappy with certain aspects. And the final decision was a unanimous one in the name of the court. We all contributed in different ways. We said there's no issue, no question that Mr. Mohammed should be extradited to the United States to face these very serious criminal charges. That wasn't the issue. But there is a problem about the fact that he was denied his right to counsel. Everybody has a right to legal counsel. And the more serious the charge, the more important it is that that right be respected, so that the person can make whatever choices are necessary in an informed way. But the more profound problem was that he faced capital punishment if found guilty in the United States. And our court had held that capital punishment violated the normative system established, the normative value system established by our Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights didn't expressly refer to capital punishment, but taking together the right to life, the right to human dignity, the right not to be subjected to cruel, inhuman punishment or treatment, we unanimously had decided capital punishment is inconsistent with the values of our new Constitution. And he was being handed over in this way. The word rendition was used for the first time in my experience. And what made it particularly, made the issue particularly sharp was that one of Mohammed's co-conspirators in Germany had been handed over after proper extradition proceedings in Germany and after an assurance had been given that if found guilty, he would not be executed. And the State Department gave that assurance to the German government. But we're just that little country at the bottom of Africa. What do we know about the rule of law? That assurance wasn't given. And the importance for us was not related only to Mr. Mohammed. What were our officials doing? They were all excited, working with the FBI on this big anti-terrorism matter. And in their excitement, completely ignoring the requirement that if Mr. Mohammed is handed over, he shouldn't face capital punishment. To conclude and to relate these experiences to the book, The Strange Alchemy of Life and Law. How do my experiences that I've described to you in the anti-apartheid struggle connect up with the decision that I made? And I call it a strange alchemy because the answers are not automatic and predictable. Somebody could go through those experiences and say, well, they did it to us, now it's their turn. Or we were people fighting for freedom and democracy. They had no right to do this to us. But here we're dealing with somebody who's completely violating the rights of others in a indiscriminate way. There are many ways in which you can interpret your experience. And what was striking was 11 of us with totally different life experiences, professional experiences, unanimously agreed, because we were all in sync with the deep values of the Constitution. I don't know why, I think particularly of my colleague Laurie Ackerman, from a sort of middle upper class Afrikaner family, very religious Christian, his wife a professor of Christian theology, and it was his Christian beliefs, and particularly he was a great believer in the writings of Immanuel Kant, a kind of enlightened Christianity, if you like. It was his religious beliefs that made him place human dignity at the core of his thinking as a judge. I grew up in a totally different kind of a setting. International socialism, you're fighting a system, not individuals. Human dignity is what it's all about, the dignity of the oppressed people, the rights of people not to be downtrodden because of their station, their birth, accidents of life, and so on. So from very different philosophical and experiential foundations, we agree completely, without argument, because of that, the intensity of the need to show empathy, if you like, respect for human dignity. I don't think any of us had any respect or sympathy or concern for Mr. Muhammad as an individual. We hated that kind of action, which was a distortion and almost a repudiation of the whole liberation ethic and ideal. But that wasn't the issue. He's still a human being. He should not be executed. Whether it's with a needle or a firing squad or electric chair or whatever it is, the state shouldn't kill. It's part and parcel of that very thing of blowing up buildings, the state killing. We would see that as part and parcel of the same kind of program that you want to avoid. It's a bit of a cop-out to call something a strange alchemy, and that explains everything. But in writing the book, I was trying to capture something of the experience of being a judge, not writing from an analytical point of view of what the role of the judge is, the judicial function, in terms of some idealized concept of the workings of the state and separation of powers, but just as me, Albie, wearing the gown, going through all the travail and the problems. Why is it so difficult to write a judgment? Why did my secretary hide the document one day? She said, Albie, it's the 26th version, and we're not giving it to you anymore. It's going into court as it is. You're not making any more changes. And that whole tension between what I call reason and passion, and the way the discipline, the rigor of pure reasoning and logic wrestle with, I always had the image of wrestle with the empathy, the passion, the sense of existence, the meaning of what it is to be a human being, of judges themselves being human beings, not machines mechanically dishing out some kind of autopilot answer to questions. Then you don't need judges, but people weighing up and balancing out all the different factors and interests involved, giving the reasons for doing that, part of the very processes which they are judging, not abstracted from those processes. I try to convey something of that kind. It's been an enormous joy writing the book, and it's been a wonderful chance for me coming back to Northeastern to be able to share some of these experiences with you. Thank you all very much.
and then there are some books outside, and Justice Sachs will sign them if you like, and you could talk to him a little bit more informally. So, but first, some questions?
Pen and paper.
Don't all rush at once. Yes.
Okay, if I could take a bunch of questions.
Okay. Why don't we take three and not class? Come on. Yes. Wait. Steve.
Over again, time the Constitution related how you would handle the economic disparity. Way both people, yeah. But what would you do today if it got the same problem?
Rebecca.
Uh-huh.
Careful with the word retirement.
Mm-hmm.
You want to address those?
Left us to draw the inferences from
You can wrap that up in 2 or 3 minutes.
Countries outside, in the end, we got huge international support. And it's one reason, if you look through my judgments, you'll see the weight that I give to that. That international law applies through our Constitution to the interpretation of the Bill of Rights. It's not just a nice thing to do. It was international law that helped us get a democratic South Africa. And we are part of the world. We see ourselves very much part of the world. And these links were built in the course of struggle. I traveled across the U.S. many, many times, speaking. I'm pretty sure I spoke in northeastern, maybe late 70s, early 80s. And I owe something to a young guy who's not young anymore in St. Louis, Missouri. He came up to me after I'd spoken one day, and he must have been about 12, and hand in his pocket. And to me, a very sort of young American, sort of confident guy. And he says, excuse my accent, it's neither American nor South African, but somewhere in between. My brother, he says the problem with people like you is you're always fighting to liberate somebody else. And what you should really be doing is liberating yourself. And I thought, I don't feel that. And maybe what his brother was saying was, you know, you have to take have a little bit of chemical aid to liberate yourself. But I thought, I'm not fighting for anybody else. I'm fighting for me, for my dignity. I'm not fighting for the black people. I'm fighting for me, Albie. And the only way I can fight meaningfully and have a dignified life is if I join the struggle, overwhelmingly of black people, for their liberation. I picked that up in the United States through that kind of a question. We got tremendous support from the US towards the end with the divestment campaigns. The universities played a terrific role, consciousness raising in a big way. And in the end, when the rulers in South Africa saw even the United States government couldn't support them anymore, even Ronald Reagan couldn't defend them, and his veto was overridden by Congress, then they felt, now we've got to talk and find a way forward. The biggest support we got was from neighboring African countries, and they paid the biggest price by far, and they're still paying the price. Mozambique, very much. Angola, very much. Other countries as well. We got terrific support from Scandinavian countries, very consistent all the way through. A lot of support from East European, from Asia, from India was a tremendous backer in all sorts of different ways. Latin America, less. Somehow the language thing divides the world up in very curious ways. Even the countries in Africa, French-speaking, they were against apartheid, but they weren't mobilized and as intensely involved as the English-speaking former British colonies were. So the world interest, involvement, support was very great. There was a huge amount of overt and covert backing, particularly in the Cold War period. The Cold War was devastating for our continent. And it was perestroika that, I think, opened the way. It wasn't the fall of the Berlin Wall. We'd already made all the things I'm speaking about happened in early 88. The conferences in 85, the ANC constitutional principles in 88, just before I was blown up, and finally the Berlin Wall falling took the Cold War anti-communism dimension out of the equation. It could be seen simply as brutal oppression based on race. Why did I use the word alchemy? I discovered fairly recently that Patricia Williams had written a book, is it The Alchemy of Race and Rights? I'm an admirer of Patricia Williams. I'm not sure how often she's cited in American Supreme Court decisions, but I cited her in one of my cases of where you belong and you don't belong, and the importance of not having firm categories to divide people up. I don't recall having read that book or seen that book or seen a reference to that book, but it's possible I did. I wrote to her, and I said I'd love to give her a copy, but I didn't get a response. I don't know where she is now. If you have any contact.
I'll arrange that.
Yeah?
She's a Columbia.
Okay. And I'd really like to. So I don't know where titles come from. And right at the end of the book, I say, I belong to the enlightened. We're against alchemy, all this hocus-pocus stuff. But in spite of that fact, I call it alchemy because I can't quite get a grip on what's really going on and why I should disagree with my colleague Pius Lange, whom I love and admire very much. We have very similar backgrounds and outlooks and vision of life, but he goes this way on a case, I go that way on a case. I can't put my finger on it quite like that. But I do know that we are not machines. I do know as a lived reality, not as a notional concept, as a lived reality, being a wise Latina woman from a working class background brings something very special to the table. It doesn't provide answers. It doesn't predict outcomes, but it gives a texture, materiality, a significance to what you're doing. And then what's significant is on the courts, we're not single judge courts. We're courts of appeal, in our case 11 judges, and these subjective, different personal life experiences. Laurie Ackerman used to collect wine labels I see that as about as far from my life experience as one can get. But I wouldn't say that his commitment to human dignity was in the slightest different from mine. It just came from a different kind of a source. So that's what I meant by that strange alchemy. Once you use the word, you find it all over the place. And it's almost embarrassing that it's so freely used. Economic disparities. What would I do over again in constitution making? I don't think I'd do anything over again in the Constitution. Its problem is not one of the text. There's enough in the constitutional text to allow and authorize, to use Professor Clare's words, fairly rapid transformation. The fact that the pace has been slower than many people would like, they're political factors. Some people would say we are locked into an international gridlock. We don't really have that much of a choice. We can't go that much further. And when we started 1994, it was the height of the free market ideology and philosophy all over the world. Now that the banks have been nationalized, somehow the role of the state has got a purchase that it never had, literally a purchase that it never had before. Whether it's what's called the class project of 96, with the leadership of the ANC buying into neoliberal policies and so on, I leave that open for other people to discuss, and I don't think it would be appropriate for me to take public positions on issues like that could be read into decisions that have been written. When I was in the ANC, I spoke my voice, I took my positions and so on. Now I've had 15 years as a judge, and I have to respect a certain, and voluntarily, a certain protocol about decisions like that. But I think the most important thing is we fought very hard for a constitutional text that permitted, authorized, and to some extent even required transformation and change. So if there are doubts and criticisms over the failure to have more redistribution, then that lies in factors other than the text. We fought over every word. The longest section in the Bill of Rights is the section on property rights. There's no right to hold property. The only right equivalent to that is a right not to be deprived arbitrarily of property. And our court has said we have to interpret that in the context of the historic dispossession in our country. You can't use your classical formal rules for the rights of property, the Lockean principles and so on. That's not your starting point. The context has to be, the way I put it in one of my judgments, dispossession was 9 points of the law. And that's the historical context in which we have to look at measures being used to bring about change. The property clause goes on to allow for rapid restoration of property rights of people, communities dispossessed under racist statutes and practices after 1912 in South Africa. And we've had 80,000 claims made, some involving large numbers of people, and about 70,000 have been heard. Very important symbolically, morally for the people concerned, not changing the configuration of land ownership very substantially in our country. But the overall thrust of the document would permit fairly rapid transformation and equalizing of opportunities. Various strategies are being adopted, black economic empowerment. I think myself what's very important are the strong labor rights. The organized working class played a huge role in the achievement of democracy, and we have very strong labor rights, constitutionalized and backed up by, I think, pretty advanced legislation. I don't even want to use the word beginning with R. I can't quite explain why I feel crushed, almost empty, I'm walking around, I'm talking, I'm getting a standing ovation, which was very nice. I'm selling my book, I'll be signing, smiling. Inside I feel hollow. And I know why. I'm no longer working in the most wonderful job in the whole world. Can you imagine? You're part of that generation fighting for rights, for change. You helped to write the Constitution. You sit on the first court. You're George Washington and John Marshall all wrapped up in one. And Thurgood Marshall, if you want to carry on the analogy. You're closely connected with core ideas of the society. And what came through to me so strongly, and towards the end of the book I say, we judges are amongst the great storytellers of the 21st century. It's not just outcomes. Outcomes often are the least important aspect. They help the particular litigants. They do make a practical difference. It's the value system. It's what it means to be a South African, to be a human being. What claims you have just from being who you are. What sort of profound fundamental entitlements for being a human being should come your way. What does it say about your society? And to me, that's part of an ongoing dialogue. And it's the narrative of the nation. It's the vision of the society. It's these core features. In your case, what does it mean to be an American? These are the issues that are implicit in and deeply significant for, like the decision last week on campaign financing. Now I read in the newspapers what's happening. I'm not part of that process. I don't have that sense of umbilical connection with the deep, profound events of my society. And it's hard. It's really hard. I can't say I'm in denial because I'm going around telling everybody. I'm just about coming to terms with it. What keeps things ticking over is promoting the book and traveling around and reporting back to people, and that's great. But that's just ticking over. There's only one thing that excites me in the same way as writing a legal opinion used to do. I started working on a film script, and I just get that special kind of an energy. I don't care about all the rest. That's the most exciting thing in the world to do. I'm not telling you what it's about. The USA, I watch with great interest what's happening here, and I won't comment. I wouldn't like it if a judge from America came to South Africa and commented on decisions, what's happening, and the debates there. But I will make this point that everybody, whether you like it or not, is influenced by the United States. It's a huge exemplar for the world, partly because the promotion is so powerful. You can't miss it. It's there whether you like it or not. But partly historically, in particular, the Constitution, constitutionalism, fundamental rights, the role of the courts has been so profound and significant here. And certainly in the early years when I was writing, I drew very heavily on Brennan. Not because I liked him. I happened to meet him shortly before he died. And he is very charming and likable. I've met Nino Scalia. He's also very charming and likable. But I don't quote Scalia. I quote Brennan because he says he captures the kind of philosophy that seems to best respond to our Constitution. Whether he was in a minority or majority, that's not the point. So the US is an enormous source of inspiration or despair for everybody outside there. And what kind of exemplar will it be? A positive exemplar or a negative one? And it's sad to see that for the world outside, Guantanamo Bay is like the Bastille in France. It's the symbol of lawlessness, of naked power. And we refer to something that really terrible and outside the realm of control and rule of law completely as a Guantanamo Bay kind of experience. On the other hand, when the majority of the U.S. Supreme Court establishes even a tiny platform of legality and constitutionality, it's a feeling of elation. I felt that elation. And when courts, judges on the top court in the United Kingdom do the same, there's certain, we call them universal values. They're only universal if they really apply. And they become universal when they're under threat. It's easy to mouth these things when there's no problem. The test for a Bill of Rights is precisely when it's under threat. And to that extent, I can say now, speaking as an outsider, just discussing my own subjective responses, not commenting on the work of the court at all, I felt elated at some of the decisions on Guantanamo Bay. The Goldstone report, Richard was a colleague for a number of years, a personal friend. We've traveled together. And recently, the Arthur Chastelson, the former Chief Justice of South Africa, head of our court, together with George Bezos, one of our great advocates, issued a statement on the Goldstone report. And they said, we're not commenting on the contents of the report, but we are commenting on the personal attacks on Richard's integrity and suggestion that he is somehow dishonest and a flaky kind of a person. We've worked with him. We know that he's honorable. Even when he was a judge under apartheid, he wasn't one of those judges who was compliant. He used to visit detainees. He's one of the very few judges who used the power to visit the detainees in solitary confinement.